Dr. Hovind, I love your doctoral thesis. I've torn it to pieces with house and gaffle. I can't remember when I last pissed myself laughing. It's a good thing the thesis mopped the piss off the floor.
Welcome to part 28 of this read-through and peer review of Kent Hovind's doctoral dissertation, which was published on wikileaks.org on December the 9th, 2009. If you have not yet seen the previous episodes in this series, then I recommend that you go back and see those first, as in this episode I will start off exactly where I left off in the last. In the last episode, Kent started telling us all about Sigmund Freud. He continues in this episode. He, as in Sigmund Freud, also believed in the recapitulation theory. Well, as I said in the last episode, he wasn't right about everything. After all, it was more of Freud's method and approach that stood him out as different from his predecessors. But hey, what do I know? Many of the teachings and practices of psychology today are based on Freud's observations that man is just an animal and needs to be treated as an animal. Yes, Kent, and that's entirely correct. You see, if psychology was left in the hands of people like you, then mental illness would still be blamed on demons. And treatment would involve administrating a good kicking to the unfortunate patient until the demon left. This form of treatment, of course, is still carried out today in several parts of Africa, mainly largely thanks to church teachings. But anyway, Kent continues. The next man we come to is Sir Julian Huxley. He was born in 1887 and died in 1975. He was the first Director General of UNESCO. In brackets, United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, close brackets. He was also one of the founders of the American Humanist Association in 1933. You know, this Sir Julian Huxley sounds a thoroughly good bloke. However, Kent, I'm sure you can find some fault in him. Here we go. He was a pantheist, and believed that nature is the god that is to be worshipped. He is quoted as saying, "Darwin's theory is no longer a theory, but a fact." There's a guy who knows the difference between a scientific hypothesis and a scientific theory. He is also quoted as saying, "No supernatural designer is needed." Not only is he a thoroughly good bloke, he's also quite a smart one as well, Kent. He believed that evolution could answer all of the problems. Which problems, Kent? You have to be a little more specific. I mean, for instance, if faced with a problem such as a blocked sink, I'm sure Huxley didn't believe that if he waited long enough, then whatever was blocking it would evolve and crawl out of there, thus freeing the blockage. This is your doctoral dissertation, Kent. Being specific is rather important. But anyway, Kent carries on. He was a leader of the New Age movement until his death in 1975. Kent, Huxley was a rationalist and a member of the secular humanist movement, not the New Age movement. The three things are completely different. But anyway, it is reported by his nurse that on his deathbed, as he looked up to heaven with a blank stare, he said, "So it is true." There's two major problems with that statement and the assertions that you place on it. First of all, Kent, you're assuming that heaven exists. Naturally, you're a fundy fucktard. Personally, I think it's more rational to believe that he was actually staring blankly at the ceiling. Secondly, because of your first assumption that heaven exists, you are attributing the "so it is true" to mean that heaven is true. Of course, if you remove that assumption, the final words "so it is true" could also mean that in looking up at the ceiling, all he saw was the ceiling, and therefore there was no heaven. But as this guy had been dead for 16 years prior to you writing your thesis, I don't think anybody's going to get an answer as to what Huxley actually thought was true. But we'll continue. His brother, Aldous Huxley, born in 1894 and died in 1963, was a leader in the modern drug culture. He was an atheist, a philosopher, and a strong advocate of hallucinogenic drugs. Yes, Kent, Aldous Huxley, among other things, experimented with LSD. Kent goes on. Huxley is largely responsible for the drug culture that developed in the 60s. Probably not, Kent. That's a rather sweeping statement. I mean, if you think about it, there was an awful lot of very influential people back in the 60s, and most of them were smacked out of their head on LSD. But anyway, he was one of the first intellectuals to openly promote taking drugs as a way to expand your mind and your experience. So, Kent, in that statement, you managed to completely contradict the previous statement. But anyway, Kent, when has expanding your mind on your experience been a bad thing? I really do seriously recommend that you try it. No, I'm not endorsing drug use at all, Kent. What I am endorsing is reading books with a reading age higher than 12. But I digress. There are a number of people on the list in the 20th century who have had an influence for evolution and against God. Henry Fairfield Osborn, an American anthropologist, was a leading evolutionist and an avid racist. What is an avid racist, Kent? Is it sort of like an avid sports fan? Did Henry's mates ring him up and say, "Hey Henry, are you going to the lynching tonight?" Did he have a season ticket to cross burnings? No? Well, we'll carry on. During the first half of this century, he was the director of the American Museum of National History. For a moment then, Kent, I thought you were going to say he was the Grand Wizard to all the clans. But no. He believed that the various stages of childhood for a Caucasian were said to represent the lower races and how high they had attained in evolution. For instance, he said that the blacks were at the bottom, then the yellow races, then the whites are at the top. Let me quote from Osborn's book, The Evolution of Human Races, Natural History Magazine, January, February 1926, page 129. Osborn's book, Natural History Magazine? I think you're getting books and papers mixed up again, aren't you, Kent? We're running out of time in this episode, so I'll leave that quote for next time.